Hello, and you're very welcome back to another podcast with me, Horse O'Keefe. I forgot to say the name of the podcast. The podcast is called Why the Long Face. That was a train wreck. We'll move on. Apologies for the delay in podcast getting out. Unfortunately, 2 weeks ago we had a death in the family, so I was at home for a couple of days with the funeral, and then I was basically flat out at work, catching up on the time that I had missed. So that's why there's just been a bit of a delay. But it also kind of got me thinking about doing this episode on funerals, and specifically Irish funerals, and the whole customs around them, and just I suppose like my experience with them. And then I'm going to talk a bit about grieving, and I can't really give advice on grieving because grieving is very different for everyone, but I'm just going to talk through my own experience of grief and a couple of the things that did help me through. So thankfully I've been very fortunate. I haven't had to attend that many funerals of very, very close relatives. I've been to like lots of like wakes and funerals for like granduncles and granddaunts who I'd have been close with, but never really had anyone really, really close. The very first kind of major funeral I had was my dad's dad. That was when I was 10, but it was in England, so it was kind of I suppose it was a weird one to start with because I didn't really get the full Irish funeral effect. And honestly, like, I don't really remember much. The only thing I actually very specifically remember is so we were in my dad's house waiting to go to the church, and because there was obviously a lot of us, there was a limo organised. Now, it wasn't like a stretched Hummer limo or anything like that. It was more like one of the town cars that just happens to be a little bit longer. And I genuinely remember getting so excited because I was like, oh my god, I'm going in a limo, and like running around the house, people crying, people upset. But it did make people laugh. I remember that much. People got very smiley at the fact that little 10-year-old Owen was so excited about the fact he was going in a limo, forgetting about the fact that his grandfather had passed away. But anyway, so like I said, that was when I was 10, and I really didn't have much of an experience with funerals and stuff until 2018, when my mum's dad passed away. And that was when I really, really kind of noticed and really, really appreciated the Irish funeral. Again, it's not something I've gone into too much detail with, but my grandfather was killed in just in an accident, just kind of very suddenly, which already kind of made the grieving very strange, because it was like literally one day he was there, the next day he was gone. And that was very, very difficult because of the way it happened. There was like news crews there the following day, so it was all over the news, which again made it very kind of strange and difficult to process. Like, normally if there's like a lot of people around, you might want to take 5-10 minutes just to like go on your phone, but you'd go on your phone and like scroll through Facebook, and all you'd see is the headlines about your granddad, which was quite strange. Like, you see all these headlines and things pop up every couple of days or every couple of weeks, but you never assume it's actually going to be you that it happens to. But like even the day after, and this like the day after he passed away, the amount of people that just showed up, and for me, I loved that because everyone was there just to offer support. And some people, like neighbours or even cousins and stuff, they wouldn't necessarily come in and sit there and talk with you for ages, but they'd like come in and they'd just make like a round of tea for everyone. They'd be making like 15-20 cups of tea for everyone in the house, or like people would just go and just like bring you trays and trays of sandwiches. And to be fair, that's something that happens with a lot of Irish funerals. Like, it's not, I think it's a very Irish thing that we're like, oh Jesus, it's awful now that they've lost that person. and you kind of know that there's not much you can do for them, so you do the little things that you know you can do, like you go over, you know, help them clean the house, or you know, like bring over food and stuff like that. The village where my grandparents and like my mom's family are from, there's a particularly posh, I suppose that you'd call it a restaurant. Like it used to be an old convent. I'm probably wrong with that, but it was like converted now. It's like a posh event place. But it's the kind of place you go in and you get like 8 courses of fuck all dinner on a plate, and it's like pigeon's arsehole and all that kind of a thing. But even like someone from there came down with this massive tub of soup. Now, it happened to be curried cauliflower soup. Again, it was hard enough trying to process the fact that my grandfather was gone, never mind trying to process what the fuck curried cauliflower soup is. But again, it was the sentiment, and like there was so many people around, and like I'm not entirely sure what way funerals work in other countries. Like I obviously haven't had to experience that. I don't know, is this a normal thing everywhere? But like especially in Ireland, it all happens very, very fast. Like someone could pass away on a Monday, like the wake could be the Tuesday and the funeral could be the Wednesday, or maybe the Thursday. Like it's very, very fast, and I think that's why so many people love to just kind of like gather around and be there to kind of support you. Like the amount of people that were around was mad, but it genuinely really, really, really did help. And it was my first time ever standing for like a wake. So again, for anyone who listens who's not from Ireland, again, I don't know do you do this, but the wake is like, it's either held in like a funeral home or to be held at the person's house. So the person who passed away is laid out in the coffin, and then all the family kind of stand around, and you can come in and you shake hands or you give them a hug and you just say sorry for your loss. So it was my first time ever standing for one of those. My grandfather genuinely knew everyone. Like I've been to wakes before, you know, sometimes people have like books out the front so you can like sign. Again, it's just like a way of kind of like the family can go back and see who came or see the little notes that they left or whatever. Normally you'd go through maybe one book. We filled 7 books. The wake was supposed to be from 5 until 7. The first people kind of started showing up at about 4:30, because that's just, you know, Irish people getting in to beat the crowd. And the last person left at 8:15. Like the queues were so long that there's neighbours of ours from back home, so they came over to the village where my grandfather was from to go to the wake, and they had another funeral to go to in another village about 10-15 minutes away. So my neighbour got out and they were waiting in queue, and they realised they were going to wait for ages, so one of them left, went to the other funeral and came back, and like she still hadn't gotten into the house. That's how long the queue was. Like it was honestly ridiculous. And to be fair, I can't remember half the people that came in. Like people would have said to me since, like, oh geez, I haven't seen you since the wake, and I'm like, Jesus, were you there? Like that's mad. And again, what I love about an Irish funeral is that it's not just necessarily people coming who knew my grandfather. You know, you're there and you're shaking hands with people, and like you can kind of know, so they're like, okay, so you're here for my uncle, or you're here because you know my aunt, or you're here because you know me. And that's really, really, really nice, because it's like, again, it's this whole sense of community and people kind of getting behind you to show support and to show you kind of love this really, really difficult time. My best friend James, he was on the podcast here a couple of weeks ago. We made each other a promise years ago that if we were ever standing in a wake for someone really close to us, that we would try and make the other person laugh, and not like laugh out loud laugh, just like kind of smile, because obviously again it's a very trying time, you're very upset, there's a lot of emotions going on. All we want to do for each other is help each other crack a smile. So I saw James come in and like he was like shaking hands with my uncles and hug my mum and my sister and all that, and he got to me, and at this stage I was already in bits, I was like bawling crying, and he shook my hand and he just leaned in and he goes, "Come here, there's a fierce crowd around, is there something on?" And I did, like it, well, not in fairness, I did laugh out loud, but like again, it's those little things during those couple of days that just really help you. Now don't get me wrong either, there are a few parts of Irish funerals that I don't like. I'm not particularly religious, and like I said, I've been to kind of funerals and wakes for like granduncles and granaunts and people like that. I cannot stand the fucking decade of the rosary. It's obviously called the decade because it takes so fucking long. It's ridiculous. I can't stand it, but there's a running joke in my family. So again, one time, I think it was a grandaunt had passed away, and it's never really set as to who does it. It's just kind of left open to the floor about who's going to do the decade of the rosary. Now again, I'm not going to try and remember. It's either 10 Our Fathers and 1 Hail Mary, or 10 Hail Marys and 1 Our Father. I genuinely, I couldn't tell you. You do 10 of one thing anyway. And my grandfather, so it was his sister who passed away, he said that he'd do one. And he only did 8. And then moved on. So he did 8 of the Our Fathers or whatever it is, and then went on to the rest of it. And we were all trying not to laugh. And we said it to him afterwards. And he was like, "Yeah. What? No, I didn't." And he's like, "I always count my fingers." Now, years and years and years ago, my grandfather was in an accident when he was working on a building site, and he ended up losing 2.5 fingers. So he didn't have his thumb and like his finger next to his thumb. I can't remember what that's called either. Because that's what he said. He was like, "Yeah, I counted my fingers." And we're like, "Yeah, how many fingers have you, Granddad?" "Oh yeah." Right, so not only that, so he did the 8 and we were already trying not to laugh, but then one of Granddad's sisters did it and she said 13 of them. So she made up for, I don't know, she tried to make up for the ones that Granddad didn't do. Again, I'm aware it's not a time that you should be laughing, but sometimes I think it kind of is as well. Like, there was a lot of laughter and a lot of jokes and a lot of messing during my granddad's funeral. Like, even again, example, like when we were carrying the coffin from the church to the graveyard, because it's only across the road, but there's, for some stupid reason, they decided to put the graveyard on top of a fucking hill, so you have to carry a coffin even up a hill. And I love my grandfather, but he wasn't a small man, like, so it was heavy enough, and obviously there's only 6 of you, but because of the way the hill is, like, it's kind of unbalanced, so we basically, every one of us felt the full weight of Granddad on your shoulder at one point or another, taking it up this hill. And like, we'd already been kind of joking that, like, he was heavy, and that if Granddad was there carrying it, he'd have been like, "Ah, sure, come on, to fuck, lads, come on, get on with it, like, it's not even that heavy," like. And so we were all just like roaring and shouting this at each other, like carrying the coffin up the hill, like, "Come on, lads, it's not even that heavy," like. Or I don't know, is this a tradition everywhere? I've never really seen it done, but we did it. So once the coffin was gone into the ground, like a couple of the family members took it in turns to shovel in the dirt onto the, like, to fill in the hole basically. And of course, when I got the shovel in, that's when all the abuse started. I was asked, "Do you know what that is? Do you know how to use it?" And then there was, of course, jokes. "Jesus Christ, Granddad, I'd love to see this now." I said, "This is the first time you've ever done a bit of hard work," you know. And again, there's other people there probably looking at us being like, "What the fuck are these lads doing?" But again, it's stuff like that, you know, it just gets you through. It's little things. Like at my grandaunt's funeral that passed away 2 weeks ago, I was asked to just take up a gift, and the sacristan, so the lady who like works in the church, brought me and like my sister and whoever else was carrying the gifts over to like where they were, and she was like, okay, so you're taking them up here. And I was taking up rosary beads, and she said, okay, so you're putting the rosary beads up on the altar. Now, I saw this as an opportunity to make a little bit of a joke, because everyone was obviously upset and whatever. So I was like, okay, at the altar, that's the big table up at the front. I smiled, my sister smiled, my mum smiled, the sacristan did not smile. She was not impressed at all, but I thought it was funny. And again, it's just, like I said, it's these little things that just kind of help get you through. You know, there's always any funeral I have gone to, there always seems to end up being a conversation as well about your own funeral and kind of what you'd like or not like. And some people think it's a very morbid conversation. I don't think it's a morbid conversation at all. Like, I'll be brutally honest, there's been times in my life where I have planned out my own funeral. Like, I've picked out the songs that I wanted played at my funeral. You know, I've kind of wrote down what I want to be wearing and what I want other people to wear and all that kind of a thing. And I don't necessarily think it's morbid. I think it's just, funerals obviously are about death, and they make you think about your own life and your own eventual death and that kind of a thing. And you know, like, there's a fair chunk of my family that have all said that they don't want like the dark suits, they don't want any prayers, they don't want, like, I know myself, I don't want to be buried, I want to be cremated. My parents are the same, they don't want to be buried, they want to be cremated. Now, we do make a joke because my mum is 4'7", so there's nothing of her there, so we won't really have an urn for her ashes. We'll have like a little thimble or something, it'll be tiny, like we won't be able to give many people bits of her ashes because there'll be nothing there. There's a lot of crack to be had at a funeral, there genuinely is, and I know it's probably a strange thing to say, but like, again, even at the funeral a couple of weeks ago, you know, we're all just kind of outside, we were having a few beers, just chatting away, and you just start telling stories, and you start telling stories about the person who passed. They're good stories, they're bad stories, they're funny stories, but that's what brings you together. Now, again, I did have this kind of thought, and it's happened to me a fair few times just with the funerals I have been to. People always say, isn't it awful that we only meet at funerals? Like, there's a lot of cousins and family members that I have that I only ever happen to see at funerals, and it is sad, but like, life gets in the way sometimes. You know, people get busy and you're like, oh no, I'll definitely try and see them. But like, some of the best conversations I've had with people have been at funerals. Like, there's an older cousin of mine, it was like the night after, or the night of the wake, like when everyone else was gone away, my grandfather's wake, and everyone else, like all the family were still in the house or whatever. And she started asking me about like the tattoos and stuff, and at first she genuinely was kind of a bit, I wouldn't say judgmental, I think it's just she'd be of an older generation, so she doesn't really fully understand or get the tattoos. And we sat there for, I would say, about 2 hours, just drinking cups of tea, chatting about the tattoos and my piercings and why I am the way I am. I'm kind of talking about like granddad's views of tattoos and that, because he did not like them at all. He'd asked me, why am I constantly drawing on myself? But there is a lot to be said for a funeral, and the impact that a funeral can have. And I know people sometimes say, no, Jesus, no, I'll leave him to it now. And again, I can't speak for everyone, but I know for me that if there wasn't so many people around during that time, I would have been so lost. Like, it didn't matter where I went in the house, even if, because obviously there was times where I wanted to be alone, but the only reasons I really wanted to be alone was so that I could cry, and I couldn't. No matter where I went, there was someone to give me a hug and chat with me and make sure I was doing okay. Now, again, I do have one kind of negative thing to say about an Irish funeral, and it's more of an Irish attitude that as a man, you can't be crying at a funeral. You can't be breaking down. It's like you have an allowance, like you can break down when you see like the person in the coffin for the first time, and you can break down during the mass, and you can break down when they're buried, but that's it. You're not allowed to be crying all the time. I genuinely lost count of the amount of times I was told, oh come on now, stop crying, you have to be strong for your mother, strong for your sister, strong for your nana. And stupidly I listened. Like, even at one point during the wake, I was fairly upset, because basically what would happen was, every time someone I knew that had come for me would come in, that would set me off. But there was a string there of about 20-25 minutes where I just couldn't stop crying. Like I was getting looks from family members kind of basically saying, go outside there and, you know, sort yourself out for a few minutes and then come back in, because you can't be carrying on the way you're carrying on because you're upsetting people. And like, yeah, fair enough, I probably was upsetting people, but I was also upset. I had very suddenly lost my grandfather. Just like very suddenly they had lost their father or their uncle or their friend or their whatever, like, and it was a very, very strange time, and it did lead to me being very, very depressed for a good couple of months. And one of the things that helped me through, and this is kind of my sneaky way of doing my movie of the week, but I suppose it's video of the week. So one of my favourite videos that I've ever made came from all these emotions that I experienced during the funeral. So originally it was supposed to be like this very heavily scripted piece of me performing a eulogy. So I had it all scripted out, and I had a voice recorder from college, and I was just practicing this, like the script here in my room. And I had the script in front of me, and I was just reading it off, trying to record myself so that I could listen to it back and kind of learn it. So I was reading through the script, and I got to the end, and I just kept talking. So it was kind of like automatic writing, but it was just like automatic thought. So I wasn't thinking about what I was saying, I was just saying it. And I got this line, "I'm fine because I'm a man," into my head. So anytime I felt like I was stuck for something to say, I would just go back and say that line a couple of more times. So I ended up at about 4 minutes of just pure raw like thought and emotion, and that ended up becoming the voiceover of this new piece. And I basically just recorded a couple of clips of like me doing mundane things like drinking or having a fag, or I just sat on the couch, like the things I was doing when, like, not immediately like during the funeral. This was like the weeks after, when you're still grieving and you're still trying to process. And I was just sat there doing nothing, just sat there with my own thoughts. So I remember I went in the day after I'd done it, because it was one of the days that we had to like kind of show our progress. And I remember absolutely shitting myself, because I was like, okay, they're gonna flip, because I've completely changed my piece now from what it was. So it came to me, and two of my tutors sat down, and I pressed play, and I didn't look up once, because I was just waiting for the bollocking, and I was watching my piece. So I finished, and I turned around, and one of the tutors was crying, which then set me off. And they were just blown away by it. Like, they were really highly complimentary of it, which I hadn't really had before. Like, they were saying that needs to be like an advert on RTE and stuff. And I'm not saying that to blow smoke up my... Well, actually no, I kind of am. Like, I'm seriously proud of this piece. Like, it ended up, I entered it into the Cork Indie Film Festival, and it ended up being shown there. And it's also on my YouTube channel, if you want to give it a look. That's why I'm kind of doing it as my movie of the week, or my video of the week, or whatever you want to call it. Like, it is on my YouTube channel. It's called "I'm Fine Because I'm a Man," because it is very backwards. Doesn't matter if you're male, female, it doesn't matter what gender you are. You have emotions, you can't hide them, and there's no point in hiding them, because if you do hide them, you don't process them, and then it doesn't come out. So for anyone who has grieved, whether it's a sudden loss, or like the person was sick or anything, like there's no linear way of grieving. Like, there's no book on how to grieve and how to process grief, because it's so individual and it's so different for everyone. But there is kind of like stages of grief. There's anger, there's sadness, and then there's like acceptance. So like, the anger is like, you're angry that they're gone. or you're angry at yourself that you didn't spend enough time with that person. The sadness is obviously you're sad that they're gone and that you're never going to see them again. And the acceptance is like the end, where you kind of accept that they're gone, but that's okay, because you still have their memory, you still have like the pictures and that kind of thing for them to still kind of live on or whatever. The best piece of advice I can kind of give on grieving is listen to yourself. Take the time to sit down and really be with your thoughts and allow yourself to process the thoughts regardless of what the emotion is, whether it's the anger or the sadness, and do what's best for you. Like I said, it's not linear, so one day you could be angry, the next day you could be sad, the next day you could be accepting, and then you could bounce back to sadness or back to anger again. Or that could happen over the course of a few weeks. There's no, I could lose someone and you could lose someone tomorrow. Now, touch wood, we won't, but it could take me, 5 weeks, say, to get over it. And I know that's a very harsh way of saying it, but it could take me 5 weeks to process it. It could take you 2. There's no set thing for anyone. Again, it's a very trying time when there's a loss. There's generally always going to be arguments. People are because emotions are so high. Just try again, it's like any advice I give. I'm not saying do it, I'm saying try. Just try and take a step back and realise that whoever you're talking to, whoever is getting on your tits, they're more than likely going through a very similar thing to you. They might not necessarily be going through the exact same emotion as you. You could be sad, they could be angry. Just try and keep that in mind. And especially, and this was something that happened to me and it genuinely got on my tits, if it's a couple of weeks afterwards or a couple of months afterwards and you're still talking about it, that is okay. Don't you dare turn around to someone and say, are you not over it yet? Come on now, you need to start getting over it. That is the worst thing you can say to someone, because that person is obviously still going through a lot, and you saying that is just completely undermining how they feel, and it's going to make them doubt how they feel, and it's going to make them feel 10 times worse. So even if you are over something, or you've accepted it and you're fine with it and you're okay with the loss, that does not mean that everyone else is, and you can't push that on someone. Like I said, do what you have to do. For probably about a year and a half, maybe even 2 years, I didn't go to the grave, to my grandfather's grave, because like I said again, I'm not religious. As far as I'm concerned, I'm very morbid. He's just gone and that's it. And for me, going to a graveyard and seeing there's a slab with his name on it does nothing for me. It just upsets me more, to be honest, because as far as I'm concerned, he's not there anymore. And that caused tension within the family for some reason. Some family members thought that was disgraceful and that it was disrespectful. And that's also so wrong, because them saying that to me made me feel like they were saying I didn't love my grandfather as much as they did, which is bollocks. I just knew that going to the grave, I wasn't going to go to the grave for someone else's sake. What's the point? I do go up now. My kind of thought process on it has kind of changed slightly. We'll go up at Christmas time and we'll have an old drink of whiskey with him, which I do kind of like as a tradition. I actually remember, I think it was the first year, so I was 19 when he passed, so my sister would have only been 16, 17. I wasn't 19, what am I on about? Sorry, he passed away the week before my 21st, but that's a whole other story. So I was 21, my sister she was just 18, so yeah, she was, because in that year we had my sister's 18th, my dad's 50th, my mum and dad were 25 years married, and I was 21, so it was just a full-on year of parties. But my sister wasn't really drinking at that stage, so she didn't do it the first Christmas. I think it was the second Christmas after he passed away that we went up. And we all had these little plasticky cups, and we all just threw a drop of whiskey into it. No, I don't drink straight whiskey. I barely drink whiskey full stop. But I'm aware that you don't throw it back. My sister was not aware of this, so So we were all at the grave, some people were having a cry or just kind of talking to Granddad or whatever, and we all took our cups and said cheers, and we each took our sip. My sister threw it back because she was used to drinking like cider or whatever, threw it back and immediately started coughing and coughed all the whiskey pretty much over my grandfather. But again, it's those things that you'd be like, oh, you'd wish Granddad was here for that. And even if it's 4, 5, 10, 20 years down the line, you can still say that. You can still say, I wish that person was still here. It doesn't mean that you're not over it. And to be honest, grieving can take years. I think in a way I probably still am grieving the loss of my grandfather because of the way it happened, because it was so sudden. There is little times where I even kind of forget. Like I'd go to my grandparents' house now and you still kind of half expect to see him there. Obviously you don't. If I did see him there, I'd have a fair few questions. But like I said, as much as I enjoyed the Irish funeral, there still is a lot of backwards attitudes, and especially towards men. And like I said this in the video, like it's perfectly acceptable for like any of the female members of my family to cry and to show emotion, but I'm a man. I have to be strong and stony faced. Fuck that. You do whatever you do. You feel whatever you feel. If you want to cry, cry. If you want to be angry, be angry. There's no such thing as a good or a bad emotion when you're grieving. You just gotta feel what you're feeling. I'm aware that this is a little bit shorter of a podcast than normal, but I just wanted to, it was a very spur of the moment kind of thing now today. I was like, okay, I have a couple of hours, I'm just gonna talk about this and get it off my mind, because again, that's what the podcast is. It's me talking about things that have happened to me in my life, and that's something that's happened pretty recently, and then it just brings up, anytime now I go to a funeral or a wake, I'm immediately taken back to Granddad's one. So I just wanted to talk it out, that's the whole point of it. Next week we'll be back to our regular, well, it's never been really regular, has it? But I'm trying to get more regular with the podcasts. So lads, look, just be good to yourselves, mind yourselves, and allow yourselves to feel whatever it is your body is telling you to feel.